She stood at that podium, 8 months pregnant, watching her husband's hands begin to shake. 6 months ago, he had grabbed a microphone at a company gala and announced their divorce in front of 300 people. He called her a liability. He called her unstable. He threw her belongings onto the lawn like garbage, while his wealthy boss watched and smiled. He thought she was nothing. He thought she had nothing. He had no idea that her quiet, modest mother had secretly left her $4.2 million. And he had no idea that he had signed for those letters himself, hiding the truth, planning to steal everything before she ever found out. But here is what nobody expected. She found out anyway. What happened next will leave you speechless. 3 times, she thought she was safe. 3 times, they destroyed her hope. They leaked her medical records. They took her newborn twins. They used the court system like a weapon. But this woman, this ordinary nurse who everyone underestimated, she did something that made her husband break down, sobbing, in open court. She did not just survive. She did not just fight back. She dismantled every single lie, exposed every single betrayal, and walked out of that courtroom with her children, her inheritance, and her dignity intact. This is her story, and by the end, you will never see quiet women the same way again. Value statement and lesson. This story is not just entertainment. It is a survival guide. Inside these 100 minutes, you will learn how to document betrayal so courts believe you. You will learn why the people who hurt you are always more afraid than they appear. You will learn that rock bottom is not the end. It is where transformation begins. If you have ever been told you are too emotional, too weak, too ordinary to fight back, this story will prove them wrong. Meaning of the story. The meaning is simple but powerful. Your worth is not determined by the people who abandon you. Your strength is not measured by how much you endure in silence. And your future is not written by those who try to erase you. Sometimes the quietest women carry the loudest truths. And sometimes the people who look like they have nothing are the ones who end up with everything that matters. The courtroom smelled like old wood and fresh anxiety. Rachel Donovan stood at the podium, her pregnant belly pressing against the polished surface, and watched her husband's hands begin to shake. She had waited 6 months for this moment. 6 months of lies, 6 months of lawyers, 6 months of watching the man she once loved try to destroy everything she had built. Now it was her turn. "Your Honor," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest, "I would like to submit evidence that my husband and his attorney have been hiding for 6 months." Marcus Donovan sat at the opposite table, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for his shrinking frame. His attorney jumped up like someone had set his chair on fire. "Objection!" the attorney shouted. "This was not disclosed in discovery. This is highly irregular and completely improper." Rachel did not flinch. She had learned not to flinch. "It was not disclosed," she said calmly, "because someone made sure I never received it." She opened the manila folder in her hands. The papers inside were crisp and damning. 3 certified letters, 3 signatures that did not belong to her. 3 pieces of evidence that proved her husband had known about her inheritance before he filed for divorce, before he threw her out of her own home, before he publicly humiliated her at a company gala, before he tried to take her children. Marcus's face went gray. His hands trembled so violently that he knocked over the glass of water in front of him. The liquid spread across the table like a confession. "Rachel," he whispered. "Rachel, please." But Rachel was done listening to please. She was done listening to later and not now, and you are overreacting. She was done being the wife who stayed quiet while her world burned down around her. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp with interest. "Mrs. Donovan, please continue." Rachel took a breath. 6 months earlier, she would have looked to Marcus for reassurance. 6 months earlier, she would have doubted herself. 6 months earlier, she had been a different woman entirely. That woman was gone now. In her place stood someone new, someone forged in betrayal and tempered by loss. Someone who had learned the hard way that the people who claim to love you can also be the people who hurt you the most. Your Honor, Rachel began, this is the story of how my husband stole my inheritance, destroyed my reputation, and tried to take my children, and this is how I got everything back. 6 months earlier, Rachel Donovan was folding tiny onesies in the nursery when her phone rang. The afternoon light streamed through the window, casting warm shadows across the room she had spent months preparing. Yellow walls, because she did not know yet if she was having boys or girls. A white crib with a mobile of soft fabric stars. A rocking chair that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. Then the phone rang, and perfect ended forever. This is Dr. Morrison from Riverside General, the voice said. I am calling about Grace Holloway. Rachel's hand froze on the tiny blue onesie. Grace Holloway was her mother. Grace Holloway was supposed to be at home, probably gardening, or reading one of her mystery novels, or doing the crossword puzzle she loved so much. Grace Holloway was not supposed to be a reason for a doctor to call. What happened? Rachel asked, and her voice came out wrong. Too high, too thin. I am so sorry, Dr. Morrison said. There was a stroke. It was sudden. We did everything we could. Rachel sat down on the nursery floor because her legs stopped working. The onesie fell from her fingers. The afternoon light kept streaming through the window like nothing had changed, like the world had not just tilted on its axis and thrown her off. Her mother was gone. Grace Eleanor Holloway, who had raised Rachel alone after her father left. Grace, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for Rachel's nursing school. Grace, who called every Sunday without fail and always ended the conversation with I love you, sweetheart, and I am so proud of you. Gone. Rachel pressed her hand against her belly, where her twins were shifting and kicking, completely unaware that they would never meet their grandmother. The thought made her chest crack open. She needed Marcus. She needed her husband to hold her and tell her it would be okay. She needed to hear his voice, feel his arms around her, know that she was not alone in this sudden, terrible grief. Rachel found him in the living room, sprawled on the couch with his phone pressed to his ear. He was laughing at something, his head thrown back, his face relaxed in a way it never seemed to be anymore when he looked at her. Marcus, she said. Her voice cracked on his name. He held up one finger, the universal sign for wait, for later, for you are not important enough to interrupt. Marcus, she said again, louder this time. My mom. He covered the phone with his hand. What? He asked, and his tone was sharp with irritation. Can you see I am on a call? My mom died. The words fell into the room like stones. Marcus blinked. For 1 second, Rachel saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or the memory of the man he used to be. Then it was gone. That is rough, babe, he said. He actually said that. That is rough. Hey, can we talk about this later? I have the quarterly review coming up. Rachel stared at him. She stared at this man she had married 4 years ago. This man she had believed in and supported and loved with everything she had. He went back to his phone call. Later, Rachel would look back at this moment and recognize it for what it was. A warning sign, a red flag the size of a billboard. But in that moment, she was too grief-stricken to see clearly. She told herself he was stressed. She told herself he would be there for her when it really mattered. She told herself the man she married was still in there, somewhere. She was wrong about all of it. The funeral was small. Rachel organized everything herself because Marcus was too busy with work. She picked the flowers and chose the music and wrote the obituary while 7 months pregnant and barely able to see through her tears. Her mother would have hated the fuss. Grace Holloway had been a quiet woman who lived a quiet life. No fancy vacations, no expensive jewelry, no flashy cars or designer clothes. She had been a legal secretary for 30 years, and she had lived in the same modest house for 2 decades. When Rachel was growing up, money had always been tight. There were no luxuries, only necessities purchased carefully and stretched as far as they could go. But Grace had never complained. She had simply worked and saved and loved her daughter with a fierce, uncomplicated devotion that Rachel did not fully appreciate until now, when it was gone forever. Marcus arrived late to the funeral. He slipped into the back row while Rachel was speaking at the podium, and she watched him check his phone 3 times during her eulogy. He left early for a client dinner. Rachel stood at her mother's grave long after everyone else had gone. The autumn wind was cold, and her back ached, and her feet were swollen, and she had never felt more alone in her entire life. That was when her mother-in-law found her. Donna Donovan was 62 years old and had the kind of face that looked like it had been practicing disapproval since birth. She had never liked Rachel. That much had been clear from the beginning. Rachel was not rich enough, not accomplished enough, not good enough for her precious son. Grace was a sweet woman, Donna said, in a tone that made the word sweet sound like an insult. But let us be honest. She did not leave you much to work with, did she? Rachel turned to look at her mother-in-law. What? Marcus is under so much pressure, Donna continued. As if Rachel had not spoken, maybe focus less on this and more on supporting him. This. She called Rachel's dead mother this. Before Rachel could respond, another voice cut through the cold air. Mrs. Donovan. Keisha Williams stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest and her eyes blazing with protective fury. Keisha was Rachel's best friend and fellow nurse. She was also a single mother who had survived her own brutal divorce, and she did not suffer fools. I would offer you some food from the reception, Keisha continued, but I am not sure you can digest anything that is not someone else's self-esteem. Donna's face went red. She sputtered something about disrespect and walked away, heels clicking against the cemetery path like an angry metronome. Keisha put her arm around Rachel's shoulders. You okay? Rachel shook her head. No, but she would be. She had to be. Later that night, Rachel listened to the voicemails that had accumulated on her phone. Bills, appointment reminders, a message from an attorney's office about estate matters. She assumed it was about funeral expenses. She was too exhausted to call back. That was her first mistake. 3 days after the funeral, Victoria Ashford came to dinner. Rachel had heard the name before. Victoria was Marcus's boss, the CFO of the investment firm where he had worked for the past 5 years. He talked about her constantly. Victoria thinks this. Victoria said that. Victoria is brilliant and driven, and exactly the kind of person I need to learn from. Rachel had always felt a small twist of unease when Marcus mentioned Victoria. But she had told herself it was nothing, professional admiration, healthy ambition. She was wrong about that too. Victoria arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly salary. She was beautiful in a polished, dangerous way. Sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, a smile that never quite reached above her mouth. She walked through Rachel's home like she was evaluating property for purchase. Cozy, Victoria said, looking at the living room, very vintage. Rachel forced a smile. Thank you. Can I get you something to drink? Victoria's eyes swept over Rachel's pregnant belly with the same expression she might use for a stain on the carpet. Just water, she said. I am watching my figure. The dinner was a masterclass in subtle cruelty. Victoria praised the food with her words, while her tone suggested she had eaten better at gas stations. She discussed business with Marcus, while Rachel sat in silence, excluded from a conversation happening in her own dining room. She talked about the Singapore position. "It opens in 3 months," Victoria said to Marcus, as if Rachel were not sitting right there. "Partners bring their families, of course, but the lifestyle there requires a certain adaptability." She looked at Rachel's belly again, that same evaluating stare. "Some people are built for that kind of life," Victoria continued. "Some people are not." After Victoria left, Rachel tried to talk to Marcus. She sat on the edge of their bed and watched him undress and searched for the words to explain what she was feeling. "She makes me uncomfortable," Rachel finally said. "The way she looks at me, like I am in the way." Marcus turned, and his face was hard. "You are always uncomfortable," he said. "You are always tired. You are always something." "Marcus, I just lost my mother, and I just found out I might get the opportunity of a lifetime," Marcus snapped back. "Victoria is my future. Maybe try being grateful that I am working this hard for us." He said us like it was a weapon. He said grateful like it was something she owed him. Rachel went quiet. She had learned that arguing with Marcus only made things worse. He would twist her words, raise his voice, make her feel small and stupid and wrong for having feelings at all. So she stayed silent. She swallowed her concerns. She told herself that marriage was compromise, and love was patience, and everything would be better after the babies arrived. She had no idea that her husband had already decided to destroy her. The certified letter arrived 4 days later. Rachel was at work when the mail came. Marcus was home, supposedly preparing for a presentation. He heard the doorbell. He signed for the envelope. He saw the return address from Holloway Estate Services. He opened it. Later, when all the pieces came together, Rachel would learn exactly what that letter said. She would learn that her mother, quiet and modest Grace Holloway, had not been as simple as she appeared. For 30 years, Grace had worked as a legal secretary at a small firm that handled estate planning for wealthy clients. She had learned about investments and trusts and the quiet power of compound interest, and she had applied those lessons to her own life with patience and discipline. Every extra dollar went into index funds. Every tax refund, every small bonus, every coin she could save. For 30 years, Grace Holloway had been building something in secret. By the time she died, that something had grown to $4.2 million. The letter explained all of this. It named Rachel as the sole beneficiary of the Grace Eleanor Holloway Living Trust. It requested her presence at the estate attorney's office to complete the transfer paperwork. Marcus read every word. His hands shook as he held the paper. $4.2 million. His wife, the woman he had dismissed as ordinary and unambitious, was about to become a multimillionaire. If she found out. If the divorce was not finalized first. Marcus Donovan was not a complicated man. He wanted money. He wanted status. He wanted Victoria Ashford, who represented everything he believed he deserved. He did not want Rachel. He had not wanted her for a long time. She was a reminder of the person he used to be, back when he thought love mattered more than ambition. But divorce was messy. Divorce meant splitting assets. Divorce meant Rachel would get half of everything, including this inheritance, if they were still legally married when she claimed it, unless he moved fast, unless he made sure she never found out until it was too late. Marcus took the letter into the backyard. He watched the paper curl and blacken in the fire pit. He watched his wife's future turn to ash. Then he picked up his phone and texted Victoria. "We need to talk. Tonight, it is urgent." Victoria's penthouse overlooked the city like a throne overlooking a kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white furniture, art on the walls that cost more than most people's houses. Marcus stood in the center of it all and explained what he had found. Victoria listened without expression. Her face was a mask of perfect calm. Only her eyes moved, calculating and cold. 4.2 million, she said, when he finished. Your wife. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Marcus corrected quickly. If I file now. If I move fast, before she finds out. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled. And that smile was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. Emotions make people stupid, she said. Your wife trusts you. That is her weakness. Use it. She walked to her bar and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. She handed one to Marcus, like a reward. Here is what we are going to do, Victoria continued. You will file for divorce this week. You will frame her as financially irresponsible and emotionally unstable. You will make sure no one believes her when she eventually tells them about the money. How do I do that? Victoria's smile widened. You make her look crazy first. You document every mood swing. You tell your colleagues that you are worried about her mental state. You lay the groundwork so that when you finally leave, everyone thinks you are the victim. Marcus nodded slowly. The plan was cruel. It was manipulative. It was exactly the kind of thing he would have been horrified by 5 years ago. But that was before Victoria, before ambition, before he learned that the only thing that really mattered in this world was winning. What about the Singapore job, he asked. Victoria set down her glass. Perform well, and you will have everything you want, she said. Fail me, and you will learn exactly how small your world can become. It was a threat wrapped in a promise. Marcus heard both. He chose to believe the promise. The company gala was held at the Ashford Grand Hotel, a venue so expensive that Rachel had to look up the average dinner price before they arrived. $800 per plate. She stood in the bathroom of their home, staring at herself in the mirror, trying to make her reflection look like it belonged in a world of $800 dinners. The maternity dress she wore was nice, but not designer. Her jewelry was modest. Her hair was styled simply because she had done it herself. She looked exactly like what she was, an ER nurse who worked double shifts and clipped coupons, and had never quite understood why that made her less valuable than people who spent more money on brunch than she spent on groceries. But she went anyway, because Marcus asked her to come, because he said it was important, because she still believed somehow that her husband loved her. The ballroom was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in white silk. Servers glided between guests, carrying champagne flutes and canapes that looked like tiny works of art. Rachel felt the stares immediately. The women in their designer gowns, looking at her belly like it was a tumor. The men in their tailored suits, looking through her like she was invisible. And Victoria Ashford, standing in the center of it all, watching Rachel with a smile that held no warmth at all. There you are, Marcus said, appearing at Rachel's side. He was already holding a drink. His third, maybe. Stay close, and try not to embarrass me. Embarrass him, after everything she had done to support him, after every sacrifice she had made. But Rachel swallowed her anger. She always swallowed her anger. She had been taught that good wives were patient and understanding and did not make scenes. That was about to change. The announcement came during the toast portion of the evening. Marcus took the stage with a microphone in his hand and a strange light in his eyes. Rachel watched from the edge of the room, assuming he was about to thank his colleagues, or praise his boss, or do whatever ambitious men did at corporate events. She was not prepared for what he actually said. I have an announcement. His voice boomed through the speakers. The room fell silent. Phones rose, ready to capture whatever was coming. I have filed for divorce from Rachel. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She actually stepped backward, her hand flying to her belly as if she could shield her babies from what they were hearing. For months, Marcus continued, I have been covering up her financial problems, credit card debt, impulsive spending. I cannot let her instability affect my career or our children's future. No, no, this was not happening. This could not be happening. Rachel looked around the room, searching for one friendly face. One person who would say, this is wrong, or are you okay, or let me help you. She found nothing but staring eyes and recording phones and the sick, voyeuristic pleasure of people watching someone else's life fall apart. Security approached her then. Two men in matching blazers, their faces carefully blank. Ma'am, one of them said, we need you to come with us. For everyone's safety. For everyone's safety. As if she was the threat. As if she was the danger. Rachel looked at Marcus, standing on that stage, and she saw nothing she recognized. No guilt. No hesitation. No sign of the man she had married. Just cold, calculated cruelty. Victoria Ashford raised her champagne glass in a silent toast. Donna Donovan's voice cut through the murmurs. We tried to help her. Some people cannot be helped. And Rachel was escorted out a side door, while the cream of society watched and whispered and did absolutely nothing. She drove home in a fog. The house was dark when she arrived. Empty. Cold. Except it was not empty. Her belongings were on the front lawn, stuffed into garbage bags like trash. The locks had been changed. A piece of paper was taped to the door. Temporary restraining order. Claims of erratic behavior. Rachel Donovan is prohibited from entering the premises until further notice. Rachel read the words 3 times before they made sense. And even then, they did not make sense. Because how could this be real? How could she be standing on the lawn of her own home, surrounded by garbage bags, while her husband's lies echoed in her ears? She tried the door anyway, locked. She called Marcus. Voicemail. She called the bank. The joint account had been closed. She called her mother's number, out of habit, desperate for the one voice that had always made her feel safe. A recorded message informed her that the number was no longer in service. Rachel sat down on the grass. 7 months pregnant, homeless, penniless, publicly humiliated. She cried then, really cried, the kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it feels like it might never stop. And that was how Keisha found her. Get in the car, Keisha said. Her voice left no room for argument. Do not think. Do not talk. Just get in the car right now. Rachel got in the car. She did not know it yet, but that moment, that decision to stop sitting still and start moving forward, was the first step toward everything that would come next. Keisha's apartment was small but clean, a 2-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood, decorated with photographs of her son and motivational quotes cut from magazines. She pushed Rachel onto the couch, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and pressed a cup of hot tea into her shaking hands. Okay, Keisha said, sitting across from her. Tell me everything, so Rachel did. The funeral, Victoria, the gala, the garbage bags, the restraining order, all of it poured out in a rush of words and tears and disbelief. When she finished, Keisha was silent for a long moment. Then she said, that man is trash, and we are going to destroy him. Rachel laughed despite everything. A wet, broken sound that was not quite humor, but was not quite despair either. I do not have money for a lawyer, she said. I do not have money for anything. He took everything. Keisha leaned forward. Girl, she said, I divorced a man who hid assets in his mama's name. I know how this works. First thing tomorrow, we go to the legal aid clinic at the hospital. Second thing, we write down everything that happened tonight, dates, times, who said what. What good will that do? Keisha's eyes were fierce. The court does not care about feelings. It cares about evidence. So we are going to give them evidence. Rachel stared at her friend, at this woman who had survived her own version of hell and come out the other side, with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. She wanted to be that strong. She needed to be that strong. Keisha taught me something that night, Rachel would say later when telling this story. She said, when everything falls apart, do not think about the whole mountain. Think about the next 5 minutes. What can you do in the next 5 minutes? That night, Rachel could breathe. She could write down what happened. She could drink her tea and let her friend hold her hand and remind herself that she was still alive. Small things. But small things were how you survived. The next morning, Rachel woke up to 17 text messages from numbers she did not recognize. Word had spread. Of course it had. Someone at the gala had posted video. Someone else had shared it. By morning, Rachel Donovan's public humiliation had been viewed 40,000 times. The comments were brutal. She must have done something to deserve it. No way he would leave if she was not crazy. That poor man, trapped with someone like her. Rachel read them all because she could not help herself, because some part of her still wondered if they were right, if maybe she had done something wrong, if maybe she was as worthless as Marcus made her seem. Then Keisha walked in with coffee and toast and took the phone out of her hands. Stop, Keisha said. Those people do not know you. They do not know anything. And their opinions do not matter. But everyone thinks I am crazy. Keisha sat down beside her. So, let them think it. While they are busy judging you, we will be busy building a case that tears Marcus Donovan apart. Rachel took a breath, then another. She thought about the next 5 minutes. In the next 5 minutes, she could eat breakfast, she could shower, she could start putting one foot in front of the other. Okay, she said finally, let us go to legal aid. Daniel Reeves was not what Rachel expected. She had imagined legal aid lawyers as burned out and overworked, shuffling papers with empty eyes. Daniel was neither. He was in his mid-40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a calm, measured way of speaking that made Rachel feel like she was finally being heard. He listened to her story without interruption. He took notes. He asked clarifying questions. When she finished, he set down his pen and looked at her directly. Mrs. Donovan, he said, the restraining order is garbage. There is no evidence, no incident report, nothing to support the claims. I can get it dismissed within a week. Rachel's heart lifted. Really? Really? And these financial accusations? If your husband is lying about debt, we can subpoena records. If he is hiding assets, we will find them. For the first time in days, Rachel felt something other than despair. It was small and fragile, like a seedling pushing through concrete. Hope. There is something else, she said slowly. My mother passed away recently. I got a voicemail from an attorney about estate matters, but I never called back. I assumed it was about funeral costs. Daniel frowned. What was the name of the firm? Rachel checked her phone. Holloway Estate Services. He typed something into his computer. His frown deepened. Mrs. Donovan, he said, that is not a funeral services company. That is an estate planning firm. They handle trusts, inheritances, wealth transfers. He looked up at her. When your mother died, did anyone mention anything to you about money, investments, a trust? Rachel shook her head slowly. Number. My mother was a legal secretary. She did not have money. She lived in a tiny house and drove a 15-year-old car, and she never took vacations. There was nothing to inherit. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Her mother had been so private about finances, so insistent that Rachel learned to save and invest early. So many locked drawers and quiet conversations cut short. I think, Daniel said carefully, you need to call that estate attorney. Today. The phone call lasted 12 minutes and changed Rachel's life forever. The estate attorney's name was Patricia Coleman, and her voice was crisp with professional concern. "Ms. Donovan," Patricia said, "we have been trying to reach you for over a week. I sent 3 certified letters to your home address." Rachel's stomach dropped. "I never received any letters." A pause. Then Patricia said, "According to our records, all 3 were signed for by an M. Donovan." The world tilted. Marcus. Marcus had signed for the letters. Marcus had read them. Marcus knew. "Mrs. Donovan," Patricia continued, "your mother left you as the sole beneficiary of a living trust. The current valuation is approximately $4.2 million. Rachel's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor of Daniel's office, the phone pressed to her ear, trying to process words that did not make sense. $4.2 million? Her mother, her quiet, modest, coupon-clipping mother, had left her $4.2 million. "How?" Rachel whispered. 30 years of disciplined investing," Patricia explained. "Index funds, mostly. Your mother was remarkably consistent. She contributed every month without fail, regardless of market conditions. Compound interest did the rest." Rachel's mind raced backward through her childhood. All those years of careful spending. All those lectures about saving for the future. All those locked drawers she was never allowed to open. Her mother had not been poor. Her mother had been preparing. "Why did she never tell me?" Rachel asked. Patricia's voice softened. "The letter she left explained some of it. She wanted you to build your own life without depending on an inheritance that might never come. She wanted you to know you could survive on your own merit, and she wanted to protect you from people who might try to use you for your money. People like Marcus." Rachel thought about the timeline. Marcus had signed for the first letter 4 days after her mother's funeral. 2 days later, he had filed for divorce. 2 days after that, he had publicly humiliated her and thrown her out of her home. He knew. He had known the entire time, and he had tried to steal everything before she could find out. Daniel Reeves did not seem surprised when Rachel relayed the information. He simply nodded and made more notes and looked at her with something that might have been respect. "This changes everything," he said. "Your husband filed for divorce 2 days after learning about the inheritance. That is not coincidence. That is strategy." "What do you mean?" "If the divorce was finalized before you claimed the trust, he could argue that the inheritance was marital property. He could demand a share, maybe even half." Rachel felt sick. "So he was trying to steal my inheritance." "He was trying to steal your inheritance," Daniel confirmed. "And based on what you have told me about the gala and the restraining order, he was also trying to make you look unstable enough that no one would believe you when you eventually figured it out." The pieces clicked into place. The accusations of financial irresponsibility, the claims of erratic behavior, the whisper campaign about her mental health. All of it designed to discredit her before she ever had a chance to fight back. Rachel's hands curled into fists. Anger burned through her, hot and clean and clarifying. "What do we do?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "First, we claim your inheritance. Today, right now, we get those assets into your name where he cannot touch them. And then we prove he intercepted estate correspondence. That is mail fraud. And then we prove he filed for divorce based on information he obtained through that fraud. And then we take him apart, piece by piece." Rachel thought about Marcus on that stage, about his confident smile and his cruel words, and the way he had looked right through her like she was nothing. "Okay," she said, "let us do it." The trust transfer was completed within 48 hours. Rachel signed the paperwork in Patricia Coleman's office, her hand steady, despite the enormity of what she was doing. 4.2 million. More money than she had ever imagined. More money than Marcus had ever imagined. She thought about calling him, thought about the satisfaction of saying, "I know what you did. I know everything." But Daniel had advised against it. "Let him think he is winning," Daniel said. "Let him think you are defeated and confused and helpless. It will make his face so much more satisfying when the truth comes out." So Rachel stayed quiet. She moved into a small rental apartment near the hospital. She went back to work because she loved nursing and because routine was the only thing keeping her sane. She let Marcus believe he had won. And for a brief, beautiful moment, Rachel allowed herself to think the worst was over. She should have known better. The first disaster came 3 days later. Daniel called with news that made Rachel's blood run cold. The judge assigned to your case just granted Marcus emergency temporary custody of the unborn children. Rachel's hand went to her belly. "What? How is that even possible?" His attorney argued that you are living in unstable housing. A friend's couch. A rental apartment? They claimed you do not have the resources to provide proper care for premature infants. "But I have $4 million now, which you just claimed," Daniel said grimly. "The trust transfer has not fully cleared yet. On paper, you still look like a woman with no income and no assets living in a cheap apartment. The optics are bad." Rachel's heart pounded. This cannot be happening. It is happening, and there is more. The second disaster landed like a bomb. "Someone leaked your medical records to Marcus's attorney," Daniel continued. "Records showing you were treated for anxiety 2 years ago. They are using it to argue you are mentally unfit to be a mother." "That was one prescription," Rachel protested. "After my grandmother died, my doctor said it was situational. I have not taken medication in 18 months. I know. But they are twisting it, making it sound like you have a history of psychological instability." Rachel sank onto her couch. The babies kicked inside her, restless and uneasy, as if they could feel her distress. "How did they get my medical records?" she asked. "That is supposed to be confidential." Daniel's silence told her everything she needed to know. "Victoria," Rachel whispered. "Victoria has connections at every hospital in the city. She must have found someone willing to leak. It is possible, but proving it is another matter." Rachel closed her eyes. She had thought claiming the inheritance would protect her. She had thought knowing the truth would give her power. Instead, she was discovering that powerful people did not fight fair. They used their connections and their resources to crush anyone who threatened their plans. And right now, Rachel was very much in the way. The third disaster came at 3 in the morning. Rachel woke to cramping, sharp, rhythmic pains that started in her back and radiated through her entire body. "No," she whispered into the darkness. "Please, not yet." But her body did not listen to prayers. By 4:30, she was in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, watching numbers that meant her babies were coming 6 weeks early. The delivery was fast and terrifying. Her twins were born at 5:17 in the morning, tiny and fragile, whisked away to the NICU before Rachel could even hold them. She lay in the recovery room alone. No husband, no mother, no one to tell her it would be okay. Just the beeping of machines and the distant cry of newborns and the crushing weight of fear. Her daughters were alive, Emma Grace and Lily May, named for grandmothers who would never meet them. They were fighters, the doctors said. Small but strong, but Rachel could not hold them, could not take them home, could only press her hands against the NICU glass and watch them breathe, and pray that they would survive. The legal notification arrived while Rachel was still in the hospital. A nurse delivered it with apologetic eyes. "I am so sorry," she said. They insisted it had to be delivered immediately. Rachel read the documents with shaking hands. Marcus's attorney, was filing a motion to review her parental rights. The premature birth, they claimed, was evidence of neglect. The mother's unstable lifestyle contributed to fetal distress. They were trying to take her babies. They were trying to take her babies while they were still in the NICU, still fighting for their lives, still too small and fragile to know that the world was already trying to tear them away from their mother. Rachel put down the papers. Something inside her went very, very quiet. She had cried at the gala. She had cried on the lawn. She had cried in Keisha's apartment when everything seemed hopeless. She did not cry now, because crying was what victims did, and Rachel was done being a victim. I had $4 million in a bank account, she would say later, and I had never felt more powerless in my life. That is when I understood something important. Money is a tool, but tools are useless if you do not know how to use them. I needed to learn, fast. She picked up her phone. She called Daniel Reeves. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Tell me everything I need to fight back. And do not leave anything out." Rachel Donovan stopped being passive. She had spent her entire adult life trying to keep the peace, smoothing over conflicts, making herself smaller so others could feel bigger, believing that if she was just patient enough, and kind enough, and understanding enough, everything would work out. That woman was dead now, killed by a husband who saw kindness as weakness and love as something to exploit. In her place stood someone new, someone cold and focused and absolutely determined to win. She hired a forensic accountant named Margaret Chen. She called her Maggie, and Maggie had the kind of mind that saw patterns in numbers the way artists saw images in marble. It took Maggie 3 days to find what Rachel needed. "Your husband has been siphoning money from your joint accounts for 2 years, Maggie reported. Small amounts, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, always transferred to the same shell company." "Let me guess," Rachel said. "The company is connected to Victoria Ashford." Maggie smiled. "The company is owned by Victoria Ashford, $127,000 total, transferred under descriptions like consulting fees and professional development." Rachel felt sick and vindicated at the same time. "He was paying her," she said, "with our money. He was investing in his future," Maggie corrected. "Victoria does not accept payment. She accepts loyalty." "And your husband bought his way into her good graces with funds that should have been supporting his family." Rachel added it to the file. Evidence, proof, ammunition. The second piece came from an unlikely source. Rachel reached out to women who had worked at Victoria's company over the years. Former assistants, ex-colleagues, people who had left under mysterious circumstances. Most would not talk. Victoria's reputation was too powerful, her reach too long. But 2 women agreed to meet Rachel in a coffee shop far from the city center. They spoke quietly, nervously, checking the door every few minutes. "She did the same thing to my husband," the first woman said. Her name was Sandra, and she had been divorced for 3 years. Victoria targeted him, made him feel special, convinced him his wife was holding him back. He left me for her, and 6 months later, she discarded him like garbage. The second woman, Christine, nodded. "Same story. My husband thought he was getting the deal of a lifetime. He ended up with nothing. No job, no marriage, no future. Victoria collects married men. She uses them until they are no longer useful, and then she destroys them." "Why does she do it?" Rachel asked. Christine shrugged. "Power, I think. Control. She believes emotion is weakness. She proves it by making other people destroy their own lives for her approval." Rachel recorded everything. Names, dates, details. She was building a case, not just against Marcus, but against the woman who had orchestrated his transformation from flawed husband to calculated monster. The third piece was the most damaging of all. Rachel had kept one thing from her old life. access to the home security system. She had set it up herself 3 years ago, linking the cameras to a cloud account in her name. Marcus had changed the locks. He had changed the passwords on their shared accounts. He had erased her from their life like she had never existed. But he had forgotten about the cloud. Rachel logged in on a quiet Tuesday night and scrolled through weeks of footage. She found what she was looking for almost immediately. Marcus and Victoria. In her living room, in her kitchen, in her bedroom. The footage from the night of the gala was the worst. While Rachel was being escorted out in tears, Marcus and Victoria had returned to the house. They had opened champagne. They had laughed about how well the plan had worked. And then Victoria had walked into Rachel's closet and put on Rachel's robe. "That is my robe," Rachel whispered to herself, staring at the screen. "That is my robe and my bed and my life, and she is walking through it like it belongs to her." Keisha was with her when she found the footage. Her friend watched in horrified silence as Victoria strutted through Rachel's home wearing Rachel's clothes. "Girl," Keisha said, finally, "is that your robe she is wearing?" "Yes," Rachel replied. "And those are my sheets." Keisha was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I am going to need a minute, and possibly a weapon." Rachel laughed, despite everything. It was a dark, bitter sound, but it was better than crying. She saved the footage. She backed it up to 3 different locations, and she added it to the file. Daniel Reeves spread the evidence across his conference table and studied it with the intensity of a general planning a battle. "Mail fraud," he said, tapping the certified mail receipts. "Financial fraud," he pointed to Maggie's forensic report. "Conspiracy to deprive you of marital assets." He indicated the timeline showing Marcus's divorce filing 2 days after intercepting the inheritance letter. He looked up at Rachel. "This is good. This is very good. But there is more," Rachel said. She handed him the folder she had been building for weeks, the security footage, the testimony from Sandra and Christine, the record of anonymous calls to her home that she had traced back to Victoria's office. "And one more thing. The wellness check," Rachel said, "the one that got my daughters taken away. I had Maggie trace the phone that made the anonymous call." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And?" It was not Victoria. It was not Marcus. Rachel paused, letting the weight of what she was about to say sink in. "It was Donna, my mother-in-law. She called CPS from her personal cell phone and claimed I was an unfit mother." Daniel leaned back in his chair. He let out a low whistle. "She used her own phone?" "She did not think anyone would check," Rachel said. "She thought I would just disappear." "Well," Daniel smiled, "that was a mistake." The motion to recuse the original judge was filed 3 days later. Daniel's research had uncovered something damning. The judge assigned to Rachel's case had been Victoria's second husband's college roommate. They still golfed together every month. Conflict of interest, Daniel argued in his filing. The appearance of impropriety, the fundamental right to a fair hearing. The motion was granted. A new judge was assigned, and for one brief, shining moment, Rachel allowed herself to hope. She picked up her twins from the NICU, 8 weeks old now, small but healthy, their eyes just starting to focus on the world around them. She brought them home to her little rental apartment. She put them in the matching cribs she had bought with her inheritance money. She stood over them in the darkness and whispered promises she intended to keep. "I will protect you," she said. "No matter what it takes, no matter how hard it gets. I will keep you safe." The babies slept. Rachel watched them breathe, and for one night, everything felt like it might be okay. It was not okay. Victoria made her final move 3 days later. The knock came at 7 in the morning. Rachel opened the door, expecting a delivery driver. Instead, she found two police officers and a woman from Child Protective Services. Mrs. Donovan, the CPS worker said, "We received an anonymous tip about potential child neglect. We need to conduct a welfare check." Rachel's blood went cold. "There is no neglect. My daughters are perfectly healthy." "We still need to check," the officer said, "and if you do not cooperate, we will have to assume there is something to hide." Rachel had no choice. She let them in. The welfare check took 2 hours. The CPS worker examined every room. The officers took photographs. Rachel answered questions until her voice was hoarse and her hands were shaking. And at the end of it all, the CPS worker delivered the verdict. "Mrs. Donovan, I am sorry. Based on the information we have received about your mental health, history, and your recent custody dispute, we need to place the children in temporary protective custody, pending a full investigation." "No," Rachel whispered. "No, please," but her pleas meant nothing. The officers took her daughters. They put them in car seats and carried them out the door. Rachel watched her babies disappear into the back of a CPS vehicle. She did not scream. She did not cry. Something inside her went very, very quiet. "They took my children," she would say later. "Not because I was a bad mother, because I was an inconvenient one, because I was in the way of what powerful people wanted." And in that moment, standing in her empty apartment with her arms still shaped like she was holding her babies, Rachel made a decision. She would not just survive this. She would end it. Every lie, every scheme, every person who thought they could crush her because she was just a nurse with no power. She was about to show them what power really looked like. The emergency custody hearing was set for 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Rachel arrived at the courthouse at 7:30. She wanted to sit in the room before anyone else arrived. She wanted to breathe the air and study the walls and remind herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Daniel had prepared her for what was coming. Marcus's attorney would attack her character. They would use her anxiety prescription, her premature delivery, the CPS investigation. They would try to make her look unstable and unfit and unworthy. And Rachel was going to let them build their case, Daniel had said. Let them feel confident. And then we knock it all down. The courtroom filled slowly. Marcus entered first, looking haggard. He had lost weight since the gala. His suit did not fit as well as it used to. His eyes were red-rimmed and anxious. Good, Rachel thought. Be afraid. Victoria did not come. Rachel had expected that. Victoria never appeared when there was a risk of accountability. She operated through proxies, through puppets, through men like Marcus, who were too desperate and too weak to see they were being used. Donna came, though. She sat behind Marcus in the gallery, her face set in stubborn defiance. She did not know yet that her phone records had been subpoenaed. She did not know that her own cruelty was about to be exposed. Rachel almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Marcus's attorney presented their case first. It was everything Daniel had predicted: the anxiety prescription, the premature birth, the CPS investigation, the claims of financial irresponsibility and emotional instability. Rachel listened without reacting. She had learned not to let her face betray her emotions. She had learned to be still and quiet and patient, like a snake waiting for the right moment to strike. And then it was her turn. Daniel called her to the stand. Rachel walked to the podium with her shoulders back and her chin up. No tears, no trembling, no weakness. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I would like to submit evidence that my husband and his legal team have been hiding for 6 months." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rachel opened the manila folder, the same folder from the beginning of this story. The folder that held the truth. My husband intercepted 3 certified letters informing me of my inheritance from my mother's estate, she said. Here are the postal receipts showing his signature. Here is the handwriting analysis confirming the signature is his. And here's the timeline showing he filed for divorce exactly 2 days after signing for the first letter. Marcus went pale. His attorney started to object, but the judge waved him silent. Continue. Over 24 months, Rachel continued, $127,000 was transferred from our joint accounts to a shell company controlled by Victoria Ashford. Here's the forensic accounting report documenting every transaction. Victoria's name rippled through the courtroom. Whispers rose from the gallery. On the night my husband publicly humiliated me and threw me out of my home, he and Victoria Ashford celebrated in my marital bedroom. Here is the security footage. The judge watched the footage on a tablet. His expression hardened. And finally, Rachel said, the anonymous tip that led to my daughters being taken from me was made from a phone registered to Donna Donovan. Here is the call record. Donna's gasp was audible throughout the room. Marcus looked at his mother looked at the floor, and Rachel looked at the judge. I am not the unstable one in this courtroom, she said quietly. I am not the liar. I am not the thief. I am a mother who was targeted by people who thought I was powerless. I am here to prove them wrong. Daniel called Marcus to the stand next. Under oath, under pressure, under the weight of everything he had done. Mr. Donovan, Daniel began, were you aware of your wife's inheritance when you filed for divorce? Marcus's eyes darted to where Victoria should have been sitting. The empty seat, the abandoned puppet. I had heard something, he stammered, but yes or no? Were you aware? A long pause. Marcus's hands were shaking. His face was gray. She told me to, he finally whispered. Victoria told me if I did not act fast, I would lose everything. She said Rachel would take everything from me. The courtroom went silent. Who told you? Daniel pressed. Victoria, Marcus said, louder now. Victoria Ashford. She planned it all. She said she had connections to the judge, the first judge. She said she could make sure the ruling went our way. Judicial tampering. Marcus had just confessed to conspiracy to commit judicial tampering on the record in open court under oath. His attorney dropped his head into his hands. Donna started crying, and Marcus finally looked at Rachel. There were tears in his eyes, real tears. The kind of tears he should have cried at her mother's funeral. The kind of tears he should have cried when he was throwing her out of her home. Too late. 6 months too late. Rachel, he whispered, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not mean for it to go this far. I did not want... Rachel's voice was calm, quiet, final. You had a wife who would have walked through fire for you, she said. You had 2 daughters who would have adored you. You had a family. She paused. And you traded it all for someone who just threw you away the moment you became inconvenient. Marcus flinched, like she had struck him. I forgive you, Rachel said, because holding on to anger will only hurt me and my children. But I will never forget, and I will never let you hurt my daughters again. She turned away. She did not look back. The judge's ruling came down that afternoon. Full custody to Rachel Donovan. Marcus was granted supervised visitation only, pending a criminal investigation. Restraining orders against Marcus, Victoria, and Donna. All legal fees to be paid by Marcus. The CPS case was dismissed with a notation that the original report was mailed maliciously. Referral to the prosecutor's office for investigation of mail fraud, judicial tampering, and conspiracy. Rachel listened to each ruling with her hands clasped in her lap. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply nodded and said thank you, and walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. Keisha was waiting outside with 2 car seats. "They released the babies," Keisha said. "They are waiting for you at CPS right now." Rachel ran. She ran through the courthouse and across the parking lot and into the CPS building. She ran until she found the room where her daughters were waiting. Emma Grace and Lily Mae, 12 weeks old, safe. Rachel picked them up, one in each arm. She held them against her chest and buried her face in their tiny bodies and let herself cry for the first time in weeks. Happy tears, relief tears, tears that said, "It is over. We made it. We are going to be okay." The aftermath unfolded over the following months. Victoria Ashford was investigated for judicial tampering and corporate misconduct. She resigned from her position before she could be fired. Both of her ex-husbands came forward with stories that corroborated Rachel's evidence. The last anyone heard, Victoria had left the country. Running from consequences she had spent her whole life avoiding. Donna Donovan was charged with filing a false CPS report. She received community service at a women's shelter, which Rachel privately thought was perfect. Let her spend 6 months face to face with the women whose lives were destroyed by false accusations. Her church group found out. Her friends stopped calling. Her precious reputation crumbled into dust. And Marcus lost his job. He faced criminal charges for mail fraud and conspiracy. The Singapore position went to someone else. The life he had imagined with Victoria evaporated like morning fog. He moved back in with his mother. 2 broken people in a silent house, living with the consequences of their choices. Keisha came over one evening while Rachel was feeding the twins. She brought wine and takeout, and the kind of honest friendship that does not need fancy words. "You know what is funny?" Keisha said. "He left you because he thought you were nothing. Now he has got nothing. And you have got everything that actually matters." Rachel looked at her daughters. At the home she had built with her own hands, at the life she had fought for and won. "Yeah," she said softly, "I do." 1 year later, Rachel Donovan stood in the backyard of her new house. It was small but beautiful, a cottage with a garden and a porch swing and a fence that kept the world at a comfortable distance. She had bought it with money from her mother's trust, but she had made it a home with love and work and the determination to build something lasting. The twins were walking now, toddling across the grass on unsteady legs, giggling at nothing, discovering a world that was still full of wonder. Rachel watched them and thought about everything that had brought her here: the grief, the betrayal, the humiliation, the moments when she thought she would never survive, and the truth she had learned through all of it. "Freedom is not about having everything," she had said in an interview a few weeks earlier. "Freedom is about having choices. And the most important choice I made was not in the courtroom. It was in that moment on the lawn, surrounded by garbage bags, when I decided I was worth fighting for." The interviewer had asked if she had any advice for women going through similar situations. Rachel had thought about it for a long moment. "Document everything," she said finally. "Texts, emails, conversations. The court does not care about feelings. It cares about evidence. So, give them evidence. What else? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do not let anyone gaslight you into doubting what you know to be true, and find one person who believes you. Just one. That is all you need to start. One person who will hold your hand and remind you that you are not crazy and help you figure out the next 5 minutes." The interviewer had smiled. "That is good advice." Rachel had smiled back. "I learned it the hard way." The twins ran toward her now, arms outstretched, faces bright with the uncomplicated joy of being alive. Rachel caught them both. She scooped them up and held them tight, and breathed in the smell of grass and sunshine and possibility. My mother spent her whole life quietly preparing for a future she would never see, Rachel thought. She did not leave me money so I could be rich. She left me money so I could be free. Grace Holloway had understood something Rachel was only beginning to learn. True wealth was not measured in dollars. It was measured in choices, in freedom, in the ability to walk away from people who hurt you and toward people who loved you. Rachel had all of that now, and she was never going to let it go. Somewhere in another city, Marcus Donovan sat in his mother's living room, staring at a wall. He thought about Rachel sometimes, about the life they could have had, about the family he threw away for a woman who never loved him at all. He thought about calling her, apologizing again, begging for another chance. But he knew it was pointless. Some doors, once closed, stayed closed forever. The worst punishment was not the criminal charges, or the lost job, or the public humiliation. The worst punishment was knowing that he had held something precious in his hands and crushed it himself. He would live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. And Rachel? Rachel lived too, but differently, better. She went back to nursing because she loved the work. She volunteered at legal aid clinics, helping other women navigate the system that had nearly destroyed her. She donated to organizations that supported single mothers and domestic violence survivors, and anyone who had ever been told they were not enough. She raised her daughters to be kind but strong, to trust but verify, to love but never lose themselves in someone else's definition of who they should be. And every year, on the anniversary of her mother's death, she visited the grave and told Grace everything that had happened. The good things, the hard things, the way life had turned out so different from what either of them expected. "Thank you," Rachel always said at the end. "Thank you for preparing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for teaching me that I could survive anything." The wind would rustle through the trees. The sun would warm her face, and Rachel would walk away knowing that her mother was proud. The people who try to crush you are almost always more afraid than you are. They just hide it better. Remember that the next time someone tries to make you feel small, remember that the next time someone tries to take what is yours, remember that the next time you are sitting on a lawn, surrounded by garbage bags, wondering if you will ever be okay again. You will be okay. You will be more than okay. You will be unstoppable. All you have to do is decide that you are worth fighting for, and then fight. If you believe every woman deserves to know her own power, hit that subscribe button right now. If you have ever been underestimated, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I read every single one, and if you know someone who needs to hear this story tonight, share this video. It might be exactly what she needs to start fighting for herself. Stay with me until the end. The moment in that courtroom when his hands start shaking, you do not want to miss it. Let us begin. Closing credit. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real-life lessons. Every scene was crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower women who have faced betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Thank you for being part of this journey.